Welcome to State of Us, Election 2020, Joe's politics show, looking at all things around the general election. I'm here with the very ill Carl Kinsella, who could get sick at any moment, and Ellen Coyne, who's been to two party manifesto launches today, so God knows what is wrong with you. Yes, it is only week 2 of the election campaign. This is like the Bizarro World Cup. You know the way the World Cup, you're like, never end, keep going. I can't believe this is going to come to an end. This is the exact opposite. It's like, I was writing the notes this week, can't only be week 2, but this is the first full week of the campaign. And it began, we seemed like we were actually, it was almost like you could believe that this was going to be interesting. This was going to be exciting. There was the poll last weekend, Sunday Times Behaviour and Attitudes poll said Fianna Gael were in trouble. They dropped 12 points. That followed up by another poll in the Irish Times, which said they had dropped their poll. They dropped 6 points since October, and Sinn Féin were up 7 points. And it was like, yes, this is exciting. This is something we can all get wound up about. And then what happened? We were exposed to the people who will lead Ireland. And suddenly, once that debate began on Wednesday night, which seems like, months ago now, and it seemed like even longer in the process, and you were there, and I extend my deepest compassion to both of you. But once that debate began, it was like being on a long train journey when you have an empty seat and then somebody sits down beside you and starts talking to you about, their Victorian spoon collection. And like, you're going to have to do 3 hours of this. And I wonder, can we ever recover? Will we ever see the glad, confident morning that was, the time before we had to watch Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin speak on what they will do if they lead the country for the next 5 years? We've had the manifesto launches since then, and nobody expects them to inject any excitement into the campaign. But Ellen Coyne, head of politics, what do you think at this stage is the state of the campaign?
I mean, at the start of that debate, it was almost like starting like a really amazing Netflix series and accidentally watching the last episode and finding out how it ends. I think it was within 10 minutes, like Leo Varadkar was like, yeah, go in with Fianna Fáil. And I was like, well, okay, so can we just skip? Like at this point in time, I feel like anybody who isn't like super like hyped up about either a Fianna Fáil government or a Fine Gael government is just waiting to find out who will sacrifice themselves to go into coalition with them. I think that at this stage of the campaign, the initial fervour has very much died down. I think you slightly alluded to that in your intro. And you basically have like the skeleton of it. So you can see very clearly Fine Gael are sticking with this Brexit thing. I'm not going to mention the analogy they keep using because I know you hate it. Fianna Fáil are like, the country is absolutely seething, health and housing are in absolute shambles, and Fine Gael are shallow media obsessives who need to be kicked out. Fine Gael are saying Fianna Fáil will put all your money in a big pile and burn it, like while holding cigars and whiskey and stuff, and that's basically it. And anything that happens from now on is just going to be an extension of those arguments, unless there's some other surprise like the pension issue or crime that came up in week 1.
There is an idea, like from sort of the Fine Gael side of things, that like whatever bounce, and I don't think actually calling it a bounce would be kind of harsh on things that actually bounce, but whatever Fianna Fáil have got at the start of this campaign can't sustain itself because it's just
more of a twitch,
more of a little involuntary movement. But whatever it is, it can't sustain it because all they have is Micheál Martin, and they don't have anything beyond that. And that's not a huge selling point even to begin with. Carl, you've probably immersed yourself in this election in a way you haven't done before. Like, what's your initial view of it, and how do you feel it's actually people are engaging with it?
Well, it's been great to delve into the world of political correspondency. It's always been a dream of mine to join the ranks of the Irish political corps, and now I'm there. And
one day, you see, this is funny because one day you'll probably end up as like an advisor to
don't say
the
that.
Taoiseach.
That's
The new socialist communist.
Or even worse, it won't be even a socialist communist.
No,
it'll
be like, somehow I'll end up.
Progressive Democrats will be relaunched with Carl Kinsella.
That's it. Michael McDowell
advisor.
will make a comeback, and somehow I'll be like there.
You're like, forget about all that stuff, guys.
Confused about how I ended up in the role as director, but yeah, I mean, like you say, it's amazing because when the election was first called, it was like, wow, only 24 days until the election. This is going to be such a quick turnaround. And now it's, we're maybe 10 days into it. It's like, how am I not dead already? It's been slow going, and definitely, I think time itself was warped by the debate on Wednesday. I think we ended up in a situation where, like Alan says, we had Leo Varadkar immediately rolling over and playing dead and saying, oh yeah, coalition, no problem. Micheál Martin doesn't have to do that because he's in a situation where the polls, like you say, whether it's a bounce or a twitch, the polls are being more friendly to Fianna Fáil at the minute, so they don't have to pander to the Fine Gael audience at all and say that there needs to be a coalition. So I mean, obviously Fianna Fáil in a stronger place at the moment. It hasn't been the most interesting of weeks, but things are looking good for Micheál Martin, at least right now. But
do you think we're experiencing, like most people, as in any country in any election, don't pay any attention at this stage? They pay very little attention, and they're probably aware. They've watched the big debates and that kind of stuff. But like that sense of two leaders that nobody is really excited by. Like, is that something that is reflected in a broader around the country, do you think, or is it something that when you go onto Twitter and you turn on the debate and you see that coming back at you, is only representative of a very small cohort?
Yeah, well, so I was down in Omni Shopping Centre in Santry today for the second time in 2 days.
What happened to you? Why were you there yesterday?
The first time I was trying to find Leo Varadkar. Turns out he wasn't there.
He was ill.
Then he was ill.
He was ill. So you didn't catch the bug from Leo Varadkar?
Yeah, well, that's.
It would be good if you were actually getting so close to politicians now.
That would be a great thing to put on my CV. It's like I followed him so closely that I caught
the vomiting bug.
But so I was down there yesterday. I thought he'd be there. He wasn't. That's why I'm not. Or that's why I'm more of a failed political correspondent than an actual political correspondent. But no, he was there today, and there actually was a decent amount of excitement. Which like as someone who spends a lot of time on social media, it is almost surprising to get out into the real world and see the positive reception that the seemingly unpopular politicians can get, like the story you told last week about the woman in the cafe who wanted a selfie with the Taoiseach and wasn't going to vote for him. I think you could be seeing the same thing in the Omni Shopping Centre as well. Like none of the people who interacted with him seemed to be engaged on any kind of. They weren't interested in the politics of it. They just wanted the picture with the tall, handsome Taoiseach, and he is very tall and very handsome, almost disappointingly so. It's kind of shocking to have such a handsome Taoiseach. He is very handsome. But
someone from Fine Gael is listening to this. They're going to think they're on like psychedelics or something. They have no idea why Joe is like fawning over how handsomely
Yeah. I mean, like, my problem. People's problems with Leo aren't that he's not handsome. You can't take that. You can't take that away from him. And I'm just not going to try. But as far as like today, there was excitement there to see him. People gathered around. Kids were excited by him. So that was interesting. They were less excited by Noel Rock, but who can?
It's good to get just pull us away from the Fine Gael love in there. Ellen, like that debate though did seem to sum up something, whether it is reflective of, and it does seem to be reflective of something broader, because you look at the Irish Times poll, and one of the, I think, beyond the top line figures, one of the key problems for Fine Gael is the figure that 75% of people want a change of government. Mm-hmm. So like that seems to me to be the key stat that is going to make it very hard for them to be back in power when people actually go to vote. But looking at that debate, like you last week, and I would have been broadly on the same side as you on that, were saying that this has to be the debate we have because these are the two people who are going to be Taoiseach. How did you feel watching it? Did you think I hold to that view, or were you wavering?
Like, on paper, it's wrong, but in political reality, it's right, because they're just like, we did an interview with Micheál Martin this week, and I tried to put to him, like, if you break down into the figures of the Irish Times poll, it's very obvious that Sinn Féin is very popular with young people from 18 to 34, and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil aren't. I think they hover at about 16%, and I think Sinn Féin is on 30, if that maths is right. And I was saying, like, isn't it just super disrespectful to young voters, the people that you and Leo Varadkar are desperately trying to engage, to basically decide at the start of the election that Mary Lou McDonald can't win? But then, like, doing my interview with Mary Lou McDonald, I kind of got the vibe, and Sinn Féin would contest this, that it suits them down to the ground to be able to sit out of government, claim that the establishment is locking them out, that, you know, Labour and the Greens are all the same. And the fact of the matter is, if Mary Lou was at that debate, it wouldn't have added to it, because she would have been in the best position to criticise both of them without any of them coming back to her. Yes, the debate felt interminable. Yes, at some points I did, like, personally doze off, but there actually was, like, at some points a very tenacious exchange of they were basically both doing a pax man on each other, on their policies, in great depth and great detail, and it didn't verge into personal. And I think that...
When was that? Remind me.
Well, the first half of the debate, like, I think that they were really good on each other on health. I think that the pensions issue was quite good as well. The housing ones, I thought they were pretty forensic with each other's detail. And yes, I might get cancelled for this, but the fact of the matter, if Mary Lou was there, she would have just said, you both failed and you're both the same. We know that already. And yes, I know we're not, like, thrilled by the thought of a Fianna Fáil or a Fine Gael government, but half the electorate, I should say, supports them. So
this is the kind of the Fianna Fáil sort of position that they have to assume the responsible role over the last 4 years. And that they have sacrificed, they did the right thing from the point of view of the country. Yeah. And if we can't find any, Carl, you've written about this, like, you saw that and you thought, like, these are two people who one has propped up the other. Yeah. So, like, what is the conflict? Where is the dramatic tension in this debate?
For me, it's not even about the dramatic tension, although I would like some more dramatic tension. But I mean, if you have the previous 4 years, we've had Fianna Fáil propping up Fine Gael. 8 minutes into the interview, we had Leo Varadkar saying the Fine Gael are happy to prop up Fianna Fáil. So I think you're in a situation where people who do want change are going to be extremely disappointed by exchanges like that. And after that's said and done, the rest of the debate to me just felt like the two sides cataloguing each other's mistakes, which for me is less about, you know, that doesn't say anything really about what your party is going to do differently. You know, it's not based on... It's not a foundational ideological sort of argument. It's just, oh, you made this mistake with health and you made this mistake with education. It's not you think about this the wrong way, or it's not your ideas are wrong. It's just that your execution is maybe corrupted or broken in some kind of minor way. And they don't really give any indication of, like, oh, this is the reason. Micheál Martin won't say Fine Gael did this process wrong. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from first principles. This is why it didn't work. He'll just say Fine Gael made this one mistake and we won't make that mistake. And Leo Varadkar counters and says, yeah, but you made a different mistake. And I think people don't learn anything from that. So while it's possible that had, say, Mary Lou or whomever else not been, whether they had been there, you know, it probably would have just been the same as, you know, it would be like Ellen says, it would be Mary Lou saying, like, well, you're both failures.
But is that part of the problem with, again, power versus protest, in a sense that, like, you know, because they both have track records of, you know, of varying degrees of failure to go to the people with, that they were always going to be judged on them, whereas as Ellen said, Sinn Féin can just offer opposition and say, this is what we will do.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of that, but it is also just on the main stage an absence of different ideas. You know, like, at the end of the day, you're not, you know, like, if you plot out an ideological spectrum or whatever, at the end of the day, you're just looking at arguments within a very, very narrow parameter. Yeah. So, like, I don't think it's great that you have even though, like I say, it would have been probably a shit show no matter who was on stage. And the debates with the 7 party leaders, they're going to be a shit show. But the fact is, I think it is important that the public does get to hear ideas from outside the parties that, you know, supposedly the other half of the electorate do want to change from.
Okay, so when we talk about radical ideas, I think we probably had the most radical. Well, just somebody with ideas. I don't think it was even. We you know, we're talking about Saoirse McHugh. We're talking about the interview Ellen did with her which seemed to capture the imagination of everybody on all sides of the debate. And there were one or two lines that particularly jumped out at people. We might just hear one of them now.
If I'd say what my ideal country would be, it would be no state, it would be devolved, communities organising themselves. But I feel that in the situation we're in, we have to get involved in politics. Not least because I think we're so far away from revolution. And even though I'd be like holding out, sharpening the guillotine.
Sharpen the guillotine. The Greens were expected to make a lot of gains in middle class areas in this election because there is an appetite for real action on climate. How do you think that's the sharpening the guillotine line has gone down in those demographics?
So I got one text from a Green Party source during the week asking me if I was like a sleeper agent for Fine Gael because
again,
yeah, exactly, because apparently suggesting that you want to kill the rich has gone down very badly with rich people in Dublin. And I think that there was a beautiful tweet that I got during the week from, as I said, some people were like, sign me up to the commune, I will die for Saoirse. And there's a lot of people who are very afraid of guillotines. And somebody sent me a message and was like, I just think, the use of the word guillotine is completely inappropriate. And then added beautifully with no kind of self-awareness, especially from the Greens or any sort of party with a revolutionary agenda. So I think people need to understand, as far as I can discern, Saoirse McHugh does not possess a guillotine. Eamon Ryan is not going to be climbing into windows in Dublin South and eating rich people if they go into coalition with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. I think it's an expression, it's a very common expression used by young people on the internet, and I think there was a bit of a negative response, but if she had made remarks that were radical at the other side of the political spectrum, I feel like she'd have a programme on News Talk by now.
Well, I think there was, I felt that a little bit of the reaction was just this, rigid sort of third-rate sort of response to anybody who puts forward ideas. The thing you got from Saoirse McHugh, whatever you feel about them, was this is somebody who is thinking about things, who is
deeply,
who is engaged and who offers a vision. Whatever side of you belong, but this idea then that we're going to actually take her literally on a comment like the guillotine is kind of just it's doing a disservice to everything that you should be claiming that you want politics to be about, because it's like, okay, we know this isn't really, we know this is flippant, we know this is a facetious line, but if we seize upon this, we can then dismiss everything else that she says.
I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, it was purely metaphorical. It's not a real guillotine. It's just a metaphorical guillotine. And it is frustrating because at the end of the day, you do have that generational thing of if you spend, as I do, too much time on Twitter, words like guillotine and phrases like eat the rich are tossed about pretty willy-nilly. And, whether right or wrong, they are...
Whether eating the rich is right or wrong.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No matter, whatever your stance is on eating the rich. The fact is we're not in 16th century France. People are not going to be dragged from their homes and, burned at some kind of Wicker Man festival in Achill by Saoirse McHugh or whatever. Although that would be kind of cool. But that aside, I'm losing my train of thought here. But no, what I'm saying is that, and I think it is disingenuous, especially for people in the media, young writers in the media who do know better, to act as though those words are meant literally. I think that is just so misleading and so frustrating, because you have so much benefit of the doubt given to better established parties and older people. Older people and people who have served in the Dáil for a long time can afford slips of the tongue. And this wasn't even a slip of the tongue. It is literally just an expression. And it's an interesting expression. It gives a bit of life and a bit of, it's evocative. And I think we can all agree that it was not meant in a violent way. So I think to have a candidate who is a bit poetic and a bit romantic about her ideals is, we should absolutely welcome that.
Well, I think the other thing that's worth pointing out, Ellen, is that this was a piece about, one of the themes of it was to explore the necessity to go into politics versus protest. And so it was within that context that Saoirse was talking.
Exactly. Like we just thought it was really important to go and talk to somebody, particularly coming from a Green perspective, about whether or not if you're on the left, it's better to be ideologically pure from the outside or go into the inside and actually try to change it. And I mean, I think it's important to point out as well that she prefaced those remarks by saying my ideal. And I think, as Carl kind of said, if we got an insight into the absolute political ideal of some of the people who are already elected in the Dáil, I'm sure that would be absolutely horrific as well. Like it's probably in your ideal world is very different to the one that you're operating in. And I think the fact that she's even running as a TD shows that she's conscious of that, because she doesn't believe in the state. So like she doesn't want to be, her dream job is not being a TD in the Dáil. That in itself shows that she's willing to compromise and work within the system. I mean, I have no reason to believe that she's going to go in and start dismantling Leinster House brick by brick if when she gets in.
Good. I was going to say good, but I don't know why.
Yeah, let's keep the status quo.
I am objective and neutral on whether you should dismantle Leinster House brick by brick.
It's a beautiful building.
It's a lovely building. But it does also, again, that thing we're talking about, like that, we put that out the day of the leaders' debate, and you couldn't hope for a greater kind of counterpoint in who it energized and how it energized those people with what came later. And this, to me, is kind of one of the stories of the election. This sense of the established political parties, especially Fine Gael, not really getting what people, that are certainly a huge demographic are concerned by and energized by. And Saoirse McHugh, who may not even be elected, is speaking for them. And this is something that I think is going to be an issue, going forward as well.
I mean, Ellen, earlier on, you mentioned something that might get you cancelled. So I'm going to go with something that might get me cancelled here and say that
final episode.
Yeah. Both arrested by the end of it. But so for example, we know candidates can run in constituencies that aren't their own. It seems like it would have been much, much more sensible that if Saoirse McHugh wanted to get into Dáil Éireann, that she would have run in Dublin. Mayo is an extremely strong Fine Gael base. Enda Kenny's from there, his father's from there. They have Michael Ring, who's responsible for this great road between Castlebar and Westport. it's a really strong Fine Gael territory. Why not run somewhere that there are places where the Soc Dems will win seats, where liberal or left wing independents will win seats. Why not run in Dublin? I think if she wanted to win, she probably should have done that.
But rich people are in Dublin.
Yeah. Is this something to do with her chickens or something?
Yeah, she doesn't want to be far from her chickens either on Achill Island. Yeah.
I mean, I can't argue with that.
I don't know. She's.
I don't like.
I think it would be better. It would be such a coup for the Green Party to have a candidate like that in Mayo.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. What are her chances of getting elected?
She will get elected?
I really don't know. That constituency, as you said, Enda Kenny isn't there now, and there's a few Fine Gael candidates, so it's hard to know which way it would go.
Yeah.
I'd say Lisa Chambers is pretty. Wait, it's divided into two, I think. So I'm not actually sure.
Your man Alan Dillon is running there, and he's a two-time All-Star for Mayo. So
although he's not doing any interviews at all.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but he took down Micheál Martin's posters. That's the extent of what I know.
Well,
very in-depth.
That's the in-depth analysis. If you want the real in-depth analysis of the Mayo constituency or constituencies,
who knows?
Go someplace else.
I think it's just one. I think Mayo just have one.
Move on from that. We also in reaching out to young people across the parties. We also had Owen Murphy in this week. Carl, just steady yourself. Another. I think you would concede. You're not going to get sick, are you?
No.
Another good-looking Fine Gael top operative.
I can't see it with him.
Really?
I guess it might just be not my type kind of thing. But I don't know. For me, he doesn't do it.
Okay. But anyway, he was in, and. I was going to disagree with you there, but I was like, I'm really not in the mood to put up make an argument.
I'm not saying anything.
I'm making an argument about how good looking Owen Murphy is. But he came in, and again, when you go back to the Irish Times poll, 32% of people stress that the top issue, the main issue they'll be voting on is housing. Between housing and health is 72% of people. That's 72%. That's what they're going to vote on. And Owen Murphy is the lightning rod for every bit of anger about housing. And we might play a little bit from that interview you did, Alan, and when he was asked about the difficulties he'd experienced trying to find somewhere to live.
How did that make you feel when you were struggling to find somewhere to rent?
It's really stressful. It's really stressful if you're trying to balance a job.
But were you housing minister at the time?
Yes, yeah, I was. You're trying to do your job. You're working hard. You've got every hour of the day is taken up. Like, I don't have kids yet, so I didn't have to worry about that aspect of things. So I was lucky in that, I'm living with a friend, so he was looking for the place to live, so he was able to help with that. But it is stressful. Of course it is. I mean, I know it's stressful. I have friends in the same situation as well. They're either looking for a place to rent or looking for a place to buy, and they're finding it tough because we haven't built enough homes yet.
That's Owen Murphy talking about his own difficulties finding somewhere to rent. Ellen, were people broadly sympathetic to him?
No. I mean, I was saying earlier in the week, one of the great joys about working in a visual medium where you appear in videos is that you're very immune to sexist comments. People are like, shut up, you stupid bitch, even if I just come on a microphone and breathe. But in that video, I think that was one of the only times where we posted a video online where I was in it. And Owen Murphy was so universally unpopular that he actually surmounted misogyny. Nobody had the time to talk about what a stupid bitch I was because they were so angry at Owen Murphy. And in one sense, like Carl, you were talking about your own kind of failings as a political correspondent. I know that I'm not a good political journalist because even listening to that, I felt bad. Like, the housing market is in such a state, he was kind of screwed whatever way he answered, because first of all, to be a housing minister who's struggling to rent is just so Ireland 2020, the fact that he struggled to find a place. But then if he'd said that he hadn't struggled, it would be like he was a little princess in an ivory tower. Like, it's just, I just was kind of surprised that Fine Gael didn't have a better line prepared, because I think it's kind of well known that Owen Murphy is a renter. There's a rental crisis. There's also an election. So I kind of thought,
but what can they say in this situation? Because, it's
not about me. Let's focus on the people who are struggling.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Because like Leo Varadkar, when he answered his question, which again went down
like a ton of bricks
about, getting the key to his own house
at
when he was 24. Like, he tried to come out and clarify it by saying that he was hoping that what he was trying to say was he wanted everyone else to get
inspired,
to get into this, get into this position.
Like, maybe the fact is, when a crisis gets bad enough, there actually is no correct PR-friendly answer. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what Fine Gael are kind of coming to accept is that there is no way they can talk their way around the housing crisis. Because, like you say, like, Owen Murphy, I actually have no doubt that he struggled to find somewhere to rent, because I have friends who do earn a lot more money than I do, who also struggle to find places to rent. It's bad for literally everyone, unless you are a multi-millionaire. The fact is that you'd be better off living in almost any other city in the world. So the fact is, Owen Murphy's going to struggle to find a place to rent, and that's his honest answer. And that should tell him all he needs to know. The more amazing thing about Owen Murphy is not that he struggled to find a place to rent, it's that he wants to remain housing minister for the next 5 years. That's what I think about it.
But is this, Alan, has this taken... It can't have taken Fine Gael by surprise that housing would be this emotive issue, because we touched upon this last week as well about how Leo Varadkar talks in terms of statistics, but everybody is caught up in the housing crisis. Like, this is the thing that it is even more so, maybe not more so than health, because everybody but on a day-to-day basis it is the thing more, that not just among young people, because it affects young the parents of young people, because they worry about where their kids are going to live. Like, there are so many different ways that the housing crisis touches upon the lives of everybody, and it seems to me that this is somehow caught Fine Gael by surprise in this election.
It hasn't. They just tried desperately to divert to Brexit. Like, even today with the manifestos, chapter 1 of Fine Gael is Brexit. The last chapter in Fianna Fáil's manifesto is Brexit. And I think that you're right. Like, I remember covering the Raise the Roof demonstration outside Leinster House and meeting a woman who was like, could not have looked more Fine Gael, was like laden down with Brown Thomas bags, and actually came to join in on the protest because she was fed up of, I think, her son and his fiance living in her house when they should have been kind of off on their own. If you think about constituencies like Owen Murphy's in Dublin Bay South, so that's very swanky Fine Gael houses there, where people are seeing like their young professional kids staying there for years upon years upon years. I think it does on a daily basis affect more people than health, but there's no solid, like, all that they can say, and Leo Varadkar keeps saying, is we should have done better. I'd like to continue, if you'd please let me get it better. So all they can do is try and push the narrative onto economic sensibility, even though the Children's Hospital, you'd wonder, and Brexit. They can't make it about health and homelessness, as Fianna Fáil are, because they failed on those two policy areas.
But that is the thing that's going to keep coming back to them.
Yeah.
I don't know how they, like, for some reason I went to the Fine Gael manifesto launch today as well, and
Have you been indoctrinated?
I've been indoctrinated. I actually had to drink 2 cups of coffee simultaneously, just to kind of try and kickstart my system afterwards, because I was in such a slump. But I was struck by that. Like, I was struck by, you know, I know you don't want me, I will mention it because it's just so terrible. They have half-time in Brexit is the first, and, you know, first line. Simon Coveney.
The deadline is in like 7 days. I just don't.
Simon Coveney said that, you know, people, you know, we don't want to drop the ball, so they actually switched from the about 1-0 up to a rugby metaphor, and like that's the, you know, and they're trying to stress this and the economy as the overarching themes that will, you know, that matter more than the details like health and housing. But that isn't, unless things change massively among the electorate, that isn't reflected in what they're interested in. 3% of people, according to that Irish Times poll, consider Brexit the issue they're going to vote on.
So I think they just backed themselves to be better at framing the narrative of the election. I think they thought they'd be able to make it about Brexit and make it about like overall more esoteric macroeconomic details. And I think they just didn't give the people enough credit, to be honest. Like, one thing you've heard a lot from them is that, you know, employment is at record high levels, and it's like, oh well, everything is shit, but at least we're working very hard. You know, like people aren't happy that they have to work. You know, like people obviously want jobs, but the purpose of a job is to sustain things like housing, paying for your healthcare, paying for your childcare. So if you're working 40 hours a week and you still can't afford those things, then you're not going to be happy with the message that, oh well, at least you have a job, because your job is meaningless. You can't pay for anything.
Do you think they thought that the Brexit thing, because they'd played it in such a way, and I actually think this is an argument against them being in charge for the next half of it, because they played it in such a way where they were tough with the British. They were, you know, standing up for Ireland's issues. Simon Coveney was going out talking about, you know, sometimes like talking to, you know, Boris Johnson is like talking to how I have to talk to my 6-year-old daughter, this kind of stuff. They played it tough in that sense, and they were getting a lot of, you know, respect and you know, again, feeding into that sense of that nationalistic kind of rising feeling. They were playing into that. They thought that would play for them, but it hasn't played for them. And if you want to say that it's about Brexit, I'm not sure that if you've done that for the first half of Brexit, if you're the people that you can make the argument that, oh, now we're needed for the second half, when we actually have to cozy up to Britain and make sure that they don't get a trade deal that is damaging to us economically. Well, Britain might be looking at Simon Coveney and say, well, you're the guy who's been slagging us off for 3 years.
Yeah, I think what the government is trying to do is kind of trying to repeat on a massive scale what Simon Harris is doing on an individual scale, which is he picked a time when he was super popular, and now he's like a little like feminist doctor man who keeps talking about women's issues at all times, despite the fact that like hospitals are in crisis. And because the government was super popular at the height of kind of all the when Brexit was at its worst, and you even had people in the UK acknowledging that Ireland had played a diplomatic blinder, and Simon Coveney came out as this amazing statesman next to this kind of bumbling buffoon. They're just trying to recreate that, and they just keep trying to say all the other stuff in the manifesto doesn't matter unless you get Brexit right, because we won't be able to afford it. But I think that kind of existential fear that people had about it has gone, and maybe that means that Fine Gael called the election at the wrong time. Maybe it should have been a bit sooner, when things were still when it felt like Brexit was still a bit more dangerous.
So they are trying to Brexit. It is actually, it's full time. It's full time in Brexit.
Yeah, as
far as the public are, you know, if you're looking,
as far as the public are,
and like if you
done,
like Brexit, you know, let's get Brexit done was the message Boris Johnson ran on, and we probably all heard that. We absorbed so much from Britain that we kind of okay, it's done. Like, we're not hearing, and we're actually not engaged with Brexit, because it's not on our televisions anymore. Brexit season 2 or 3 or whatever it is over for now, and I think everybody has kind of switched off from that, so they can't really engage people on that. And then the day-to-day stuff, and again we keep coming back to this: housing, health, and we saw today with the story in the Irish Times as well about the National Children's Hospital. These things are going to be the events that keep threatening to derail Fine Gael.
Yeah, and like I think that that National Children's Hospital story could grow legs, because Micheál Martin was going absolutely nuts about it in the Fianna Fáil event earlier on today, and that just totally destroys the economic responsibility argument, which also not only destroys the platform they're putting forward for themselves, it also destroys the attack that they're trying to make on Fianna Fáil as well.
One of the surprising issues so far in this campaign, and it's it's as a result of like the horrific gangland violence that we've seen, but there has been this linkage between recreational drug use and gangland activity, and it's something that is sort of now developing its own kind of momentum within the campaign. Again, when you had Mary Lou in, Ellen, this week, we asked her about what she felt about that issue. We might just listen to that.
I think that people who take drugs for recreational use, to use that term, I think you would have to be the most unthinking person not to now pause for thought and say, right, what are the connections here? When you hear stories of the most depraved violence, dismembering a 17-year-old child, for example, I think anybody who takes recreational drugs needs to now pause and think about what they're doing and the possible connectedness of their behaviour with those that are involved in this kind of violence.
We might come back to that general point in a second, but also we did hear in the debate and subsequently, people being asked about their recreational drug use. Leo Varadkar paused for a long time before giving that answer. But on that idea, first of all, Mary Lou's idea that recreational drug users have to kind of pause. Where do you think? What level of responsibility should be put on a recreational drug user for what is going on, Ellen?
I mean, I'm surprised that this narrative took hold so fast, that it did kind of get down to personals and specifics, and I just think that the way that it's evolved, there is obviously a point there, but I think it's kind of the whole argument of trying to tackle crime by ending demand for drugs is fundamentally flawed, because ending demand for drugs is not something that you can do in one election cycle or one news cycle around a really devastating, awful crime, or through kind of guilting the public, because it's so massive and it's so monumental, and so much of it in, I guess, the drug use that's significant enough to keep drug dealers going is so drenched in issues of inequality and education and access. I think it's super simplistic, but that's genuinely not me being super lefty. I just don't think that putting it down to personal responsibility on the individuals, while I understand it's virtuous and well-meaning, I just think it's really overly simplistic.
Carl, do you think it's a way of avoiding having a more a tougher debate, or a sense where you're actually asking harder questions?
I think it is. As Ellen said, even if it was, ethically the correct point of view, it still wouldn't be the effective way of dealing with it. I mean, we've tried to shame consumers for drinking Coca-Cola, for eating Nestle, the meat industry, fast fashion from China and Taiwan, and none of that has ever worked, and it's not going to work for recreational drug use either. We've seen articles in the Irish Times about how cocaine is now as common as eating, a packet of Tato with your pint at a pub. Drugs are everywhere in Ireland, and I think the demand is there, and I think much like all the other things that kill us, like alcohol and cigarettes and fast food, the government whomever is in the government needs to wise up and develop an actual policy plan that will see us regulate these things in a way that actually takes power away from
decriminalisation.
Violent. Yeah, but decriminalisation is just one element of it. I mean, like, regardless of decriminalisation, you need to have a situation where young people don't feel like joining a drug gang is a good option. You know, like, there are all sorts of extremely foundational problems at the heart of what ends up being horrible crimes. You know, like, it's not that these crimes just come out of nowhere. They're the end of a process, and that process begins with things like poverty, lack of education, and like lack of social amenities and lack of social programs. And like, I think the fact is that to simply say that, you know, this is down to middle class people doing drugs is simplistic, because it's not going, as while it would be great to see the demand wiped out and it would be great to see so many people have a change of heart about drugs, that's not going to happen. So you need to have realistic policy goals.
I think from you know, like the narrative in this sense is also wrong, and Mary Lou actually encapsulated it in many ways, because there is, in an awful lot of instances, there is no clear line between a recreational drug user and, you know, somebody who is thrown, you know, an awful lot of people in addiction, most people in addiction start as recreational drug users, are a version of that. People take these things because in whatever they alter their mood. That is the point of taking them, and then they get locked into, in many cases, a spiral of addiction. So the idea that, you know, you can say over here, and now it's very convenient, especially if you can say there are middle class people at dinner parties, you know, taking drugs at the weekend. Like, it's there. Nobody wants to stand up for them, and that's fine. But most recreational drug users, like most, you know, if you take it, social drinkers versus people who have a problem with drink, the lines blur and the lines merge and they melt one into the other, and one person's social drinker will be another person's, this person has got a drink problem. So the idea that you can separate it and say, you know, you're doing this for recreation and you must stop, but your dependency.
Especially in a culture like Ireland's, where these things, especially with alcohol, but the same is absolutely true for drugs, that people, I think people really find it hard to tell whether or not they're addicted. You know, you could have someone who's using recreational drugs more than once a week and they'll tell you that they're not addicted. But I mean, the fact is that their demand is not going to be dissipated just because Mary Lou says. No. And to be fair, it's probably not fair to single out Mary Lou just simply on the fact that, like, decriminalisation has been very slow to, we're not there, we're nowhere near there, and we're nowhere near there. Like, Fianna Gael haven't introduced it. It's not a huge priority for anyone else.
But one of the consequences of this then has been this question. We saw it again, and it's an amazing thing about everyone who's being asked this question, that with a kind of a discipline that maybe you should expect from politicians, maybe you should expect this from people who got into politics, but anything they did when they're asked to record, it all happened when they were in college. And then it stopped. And then just the minute they stepped out with their cap and gown on, they said,
"Not anymore.
No more. You won't be seeing this again." And they haven't touched it since. Like, what is that? What is, like? And I would also say that if you joined, you know, and like, there is a very serious broader point in this, but from the point of view of, like, you know, people smoking cannabis, recreational drug like that, if you joined Young Fine Gael in college, that is a far worse thing to do than having smoked a joint.
Also, do you ever notice that this is the only context in which weed is ever referred to as cannabis? It's so weird. It's so jarring. It's
smoked
so, like,
cannabis. Yeah. It looks weird on paper. It sounds fucking weird.
Have you ever smoked cannabis? And it's just like,
so,
I don't know.
They obviously get something. Like, when they graduate, they get their little, like, politician diploma as well, which is like, you say at one point in college you were walking around as a student with your mouth open, a joint fell in, you inhaled just enough to sound cool in a hot press interview, but not enough to be degenerate and have your political career destroyed. And the point you made about Fine Gael, like, that actually is a true point, because if you follow this, like, I think this is dumb as fuck, asking politicians questions. It's so stupid. But the wider problem is, it means that the only people you end up with in politics are people who decided at the age of 16 that they wanted to be in politics, and those people
dorks
are like, you know, maybe there's some good ones, but like, those people are like sociopaths. Like, that's lunacy. And to decide from that point on that you're going to filter your life to such a point that 18 years later you might be doing a leadership debate to try to keep your job as chief against the country.
It's like Alan Partridge talking to his son, saying, you know, Fernando, it's 3:00 in the afternoon, you're in bed with a girl, you're wasting your life. It's the reverse of that. They should be, they have all visited the Victorian folly.
I want whoever the Taoiseach is to be cooler than me, so like I want them to have done more drugs than I have and the rest of that. Like, I think it's so strange that there would be any, because it just doesn't reflect real world conversations anymore. Like if you switch on, like you look at Brad Pitt, I think accepted an award at the Screen Actors Guild the other day, and he talked about smoking weed during his speech. Like weed has become so normalized in the Western world, and to still have this attitude towards it that it's like, not only is it illegal, like not only can you go to jail for it, which I mean, people don't really go to jail for weed, but like not only can
politicians anyway.
Yes, yeah. Not only can you be criminally punished for it, but like we have to tiptoe around it in conversation, and like even. But
that is also but it is an important point, because that is the conversation we should be having. Breaking the links between these drugs and criminality is the important thing to be doing.
Or the suggestion that having done drugs once makes you fundamentally a bad person, because that's the ethos behind all those questions of politicians.
Culpable for
a butterfly effect that results in
butterfly effect. Yeah, it's crazy. And I think it's, again, like, not to call them out too much, but like there was a lot, like several think pieces written about the Taoiseach's reaction to the weed question, and most of them did take the, like I saw one, I think it was in the Independent, and it was about how he let down both older voters and younger voters. The older voters by smoking the weed, and then the younger voters by not owning it. And it's like, weed is so blasé now that even if you came out and tried to own it, even if he was like, yeah, I smoked a bunch of joints in college, people would still be like, yeah, that's normal, that, like that is college behavior that everybody partakes in. So like it is just a thing of, I think maybe the media class and the politician class not really understanding the reality on the ground for most people, which is that drugs are everywhere, and that lots of regular people are involved in them, and that if we want to have a safer culture around drugs, then the government can't continue to just ignore that and have criminal legislation aimed at it.
We're going to wrap it up there, guys. Carl, well done for not getting sick. And
I'm going to smoke a joint now.
You only managed. I'm not going to say that. And Ellen, also well done for attending 2 manifesto launches today.
Much.
That's
I'd
beyond.
like to say I enjoyed it, but I didn't.
Well, that's good. That's what we want to hear on this show. You're going to hear the truth about what a manifesto launch is like, and as I say, if you want to know what actually happens in the Mayo constituencies,
please tell us.
please let us know. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on all the usual channels, and leave a review if you like the show. And we're also on YouTube, and we'll see you next week.